The Show Must Go Off is the 12th episode of Season 8 of Frasier. This is directed by Robert H. Egan, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. And it's another great episode. There are one or two things I didn't love, but in general, it's solid, it's good fun, really enjoyed it. Starts off with Frasier and Roz at a convention looking for comics for Frederick, and Noel is also there in a fun Star Trek costume. And Frasier sees Jackson Hedley, played by Derek Jacobi, and Hedley is the famous Shakespearean actor who once visited Frasier's school, really inspired him to look more into Shakespeare, and it turns out later on he was in a sci-fi show. And Frasier says, and I quote, "It just breaks my heart to see that man degraded to this." And I hate that. I really hate that. Obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious, but attitudes towards conventions, the kinds of actors who would go to conventions, certainly when this aired, are not the attitudes of today. Yes, some people may still feel the same way, but conventions are a lot more, I guess, acceptable today. Actors aren't looked down upon, and again, there are certainly people who still think that the kind of actors who do conventions are only those who are desperate for work and money. But that's not the case. We know it's not the case. Often a lot of films are previewed at conventions, and big names will go to conventions, and obviously San Diego Comic Con is absolutely huge. So if this aired today, it would be different. I'd like to think it would have played out differently. But at the same time, it is a product of its time. I kind of understand why Frasier feels that way, but it's not very comfortable. That's not one of the things I didn't like, though. I just thought that was an observation. Back at the apartment, Martin comes home from being away. He makes an unkind remark about Daphne. This is the bit I don't like, because Daphne's actually not in this, and Martin makes an unkind remark about her getting sick from standing too long in front of the open refrigerator door, which I hate. It's unkind. He's basically making a fat joke. Obviously, this is because Jane Leeves is pregnant, and I don't want to say too much about what they're doing with these comments, because it becomes clear further down the line, but pretty much every episode has had some kind of unkind remark about Daphne's weight, and I don't like it. That's the main thing that I didn't like. Thankfully, it was a brief throwaway comment, but nevertheless, I really hated it. Then Niles is there. He shows Frasier the autograph he got from Jackson Hedley back at school, and they remark that it's a terrible waste of talent to have him at the convention and doing that kind of work, which again, absolutely hate, but it is a product of its time. They decide to repay him, though, for the inspiration by reviving his career. That's how down and out they think he is. They think he is so down on his luck, which, to be fair, he hasn't had the kind of roles he used to play, and maybe he does feel like he wants to get that part of his career back, but it's not really Frasier and Niles' decision to make. But nevertheless, they decide to repay him by reviving his career, and in Niles' words, save this man. Yes, according to Niles Crane, actors who do conventions need to be saved. Again, a product of his time, but it's funny because it's just so dated in that sense. And most of Frasier generally isn't dated. It does, I think, still feel very current in a lot of ways, but every now and then something will happen and it just isn't current. But nevertheless, it does play out from here in a way that's pretty entertaining. We cut to Frasier and Niles on stage waiting for Jackson Hedley to arrive. He arrives pretty quickly, and it's very clear that he feels at home but also nervous. It did seem like at the same time he was happy to be back on the stage, happy to be treading the boards again, but there was a nervousness about him, and Derek Jacobi gave a great performance. Frasier manages to calm him down, and then we do get a very dramatic performance from Hedley, and Frasier has about 20 different facial expressions in the space of about a minute. We then cut back to the apartment. Martin is there sometime later, showing Frasier some photos from his trip, including a photo of Duke's bypass scar. Martin explains that he needed to use up the role. And those were the days when you're ready to get the photos developed, but you just need to take a couple of other photos. And the thing here is that you don't want to waste it, because you can't just take loads of photos and then choose your favourites. In the day of film, you had a limited number of photos, and if you take something that's irrelevant, you've just wasted a good photo. So apparently Duke's bypass scar was something worth taking a photo of. Niles then comes over, and Frasier shows him a videotape of Hedley's one-man show, But it turns out, and I thought this was really interesting, it turns out that his performance in this one-man show back in his heyday wasn't as good as Niles and Frasier remembered it. And I think that that's fair. I think that's very believable. I think we remember things as children much differently. I think we're often a lot more easily impressed, or maybe we could become more critical. A prime example, a childhood favourite film, we might then watch it later as adults and realise actually it's not as good as we remembered. So I think this moment was very relatable, and it was an eye-opening moment for Frasier and Niles. And now they have to try and convince him to not go on stage because they worry he's going to be humiliated. They're going to feel embarrassed for putting this all together. But it's too late. We then cut to 15 minutes to curtain at the theatre. The auditorium is packed. Frasier and Niles are frantically trying to find a way to not let the show go on. They try and say that they've exceeded maximum capacity, so Niles calls the fire marshal. Roz then comes in with Hedley's father, played by Patrick Macnee. Turns out Hedley won't go on stage if his father, his lucky charm, isn't there. Probably not the best lucky charm to have, since his father is likely to predecease him at some point, but nevertheless, they then try and get his father out of the picture. The fire marshal arrives, but it turns out he's a fan of Hedley, so he wants to stay and watch, and maybe not the best thing for a fire marshal to do, since they are at actual maximum capacity or exceeding maximum capacity. Frasier then tries to set off the sprinklers, and this played out beautifully, because he just sets off the sprinklers above his head, and it was a small moment, but I rather enjoyed it. And then Hedley slips in the water, and it seems like this is it, he can't go on. And then Frasier goes on stage to announce, oh no, Hedley is injured, the show can't go on, and we just see Hedley crawling onto the stage like an injured creature. The show will go on. And then we end with Frasier and Niles in the wings watching this performance. And it was just a brilliant episode, really good fun, really enjoyable. I think the narrative flowed well. There were a lot of obstacles, a lot of roller coaster moments. It was I think it was unpredictable. I could remember pretty much what happened from the last time I watched it, but trying to judge it, watching it for the first time, I do think it's pretty unpredictable with the way it progressed. I didn't like Martin's comment about Daphne, but it was very brief, throwaway comment. And the conversations about the convention and how degrading that is for actors, I don't love it. But again, I do know it's a product of its time, so I'm not faulting the episode. In fact, I guess it makes it quite interesting to see how attitudes have changed over the time. Great performances, of course. Derek Jacobi gave a great performance as Jackson Hedley. And as I said, I do think the point about remembering things differently as children, or maybe becoming more critical as we get older, I think is very interesting. And sometimes it's good to look at things with a childlike wonder, but it also means that there's a risk if you're going to rewatch your childhood favourites, because they might not be as good as you remember. But nevertheless, this is a good episode. Pretty much flawless for the most part, and ultimately I think it's safe to say The Show Must Go Off is a solid episode of Frasier.